Are you making these top 5 parrot training mistakes? What's going on, guys? Alan here with Parrots&Co, and in this video I wanted to talk about just that. Now, whether you are an experienced bird owner, intermediate, or maybe you're thinking about bringing a new bird home and you maybe just have a bird for a few weeks, a few days, or a few months, and you're just trying to be a better parrot owner, this video is going to be perfect for you. So what are the 5 parrot training mistakes that I see? Well, first and foremost, I would say not focusing on the fundamentals first. Now, what do I mean by that? Everything starts with the basics, and we have to learn to crawl before we can run. It's the very same thing with your parrot, right? If you have a new parrot, you're bringing it home, even if it's rehomed and it maybe knows a thing or two already, having the fundamentals first before we start progressing to other things. So maybe down the road you want to do harness training, you want to do indoor flight recall, or you want to teach us some advanced tricks, but maybe the fundamentals aren't even dialed in first. Things like step up, making sure that your parrot's needs are met, having the right nutrition dialed in, making sure that you are having scheduled feeding so that your bird's not overfed, weighing your bird, all the fundamentals that are going to enable you to succeed in the long term are going to be very important to have. And one of those fundamentals that I always say in terms of the training side of things is if your parrot doesn't know how to step up yet and it's still afraid of you, or it's uncomfortable around you, or it's scared of hands, we're gonna want to get those things dialed in before we try to do harness training or all these other things, right? So in the fundamental side of things, I would always say make sure that your parrot's nutrition is on point. Typically with Elfie, I make sure that he has a healthy chop in the morning and a pellet in the afternoon. And then from there, making sure that he's getting at least 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep, meaning his cage is covered, he's in a separate room. So if I'm out and about at night, he's not getting interrupted. And maybe you don't have that luxury, or I wouldn't even say luxury, but that second room to spare, so to speak. It's no problem. We have to work with what we have, and maybe it's at least putting your bird in an area where it's covered, it's getting uninterrupted sleep. That's going to be important. And then in terms of the training side of things, I would highly recommend that you have the step up dialed in, meaning that you can ask your bird to step up 95% of the time, and it's willing to, without forcing it, without having to grab it or putting it in a situation where it's uncomfortable. That's going to be important. Now, the other thing when it comes to mistake number 2 that I see is not timing your training sessions with your parrot and having a feeding schedule that's not dialed in. So what do I mean by that? So in order to maximize the ability or the desire for your bird to want to even work for a snack or a treat or work with you, period, we have to make sure that we're timing it in a way to where it's naturally going to be when your bird is hungriest. And that can either be first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, it's ready to eat, good time for it to focus, or right before its second feeding, so that there's been some time passed where your bird is kind of ready to eat again and it's ready to work for a snack or a treat. Very, very important. And that kind of ties into the second thing, right? Or the second component of thing number 2, which is actually having a feeding schedule. I see a lot of parrot owners, naturally they think that, hey, my bird has to have unlimited access to food 24/7. And I know it's natural to think that, so totally get where that's coming from. However, it's like me saying to you, hey, do you want some ice cream in exchange for washing these dishes? However, you've eaten all day and there's also ice cream in the fridge for you to get a hold of whenever you want. 99% of the time you're gonna be like, meh, seems like a lot of work for things I already have. And it's the very same thing with your parrot. So making sure that you have a morning feeding for an adult parrot and then an afternoon feeding is gonna be important. But one thing to note is we're not taking away food. We're not trying to starve your parrot in order for it to want to work with us. That's not the goal here. The goal is to put it in a position to maximize its focus and the desire for it to work toward the result that we have by it getting what it wants. And that's one of those things where you want to make sure that you know the proper quantity of food that you're going to give it in terms of like chop and in terms of like the actual pellets that you feed it, and just knowing how much your parrot weighs on average to a degree where you know, hey, when it's in this range, my parrot is very motivated to want to train. It's a level 8 out of 9, meaning our training sessions are always good, versus when it's a little bit overweight, more access to food, and I'm overfeeding it, it's like a 5 or 6 where it's like, oh look, it's a sock on the floor. What's that? And it's like not really focused, or it doesn't really care. So that's thing number 2. Now, for mistake number 3 that I see is not having the proper treat for your bird. So if you are trying to use fruit to motivate your bird to train, but it really, really loves almonds, or it really loves pine nuts, for example, you are kind of fighting that uphill battle in the sense of you're trying to work with something that's not motivating your parrot as much, right? And if you haven't seen it, I actually have a video on the channel where I show you how to actually select the proper treat for your bird. And it's very, very simple. Where that concept comes from is like, you take out a bunch of like styles of nuts, for example, or even seeds. I like to use almonds, cashews, walnuts, pine nuts, and macadamia nuts. And I literally just put them all on different plates or on different areas in the countertop. And then I put Elfie in the other area or across the table, and I give him 3 runs, 3 goes at it, and see which one he goes to first, which one he goes to second, and which one he goes to third. And that's kind of what I designate as his like number 1, number 2, and number 3 treats, right? And the number 1 treats I use for teaching a brand new behavior. So if I'm recently teaching Elfie wings, whenever he does that command or he gets closer to what we want, he gets that number 1 reward. For something that requires maybe a lot of effort, but he knows, for example, let's say I do an indoor flight recall where he goes across a room, I click once, he comes back all the way, click again, I'm going to give him that number 1 treat as well, because there's a little bit more effort. Now, for things that he knows, like spin, whistle, wave, that are very simple, he can do, like it's nobody's business, that's when I would use like the number 3 treats. And for Elfie, in that case, it's like pine nuts, right? So proper treat selection is going to be important to motivate your parrot to want to train and learn whatever behaviors that you want. Quick note there, right? Now, on to mistake number 4. Training etiquette is kind of what I would call it. So when it comes to, for example, clicker training, what I sometimes see is birds getting frustrated when the owner is doing too many clicks and not giving the reward right away, especially for an adult bird. Adult birds tend to have, how can I say it, a lower fuse or lower patience when it comes to these things. So if you're training your bird and you're teaching it, 1 click equals 1 reward, and then you're doing 5 or 6 clicks to try to get it to do a bunch of different things in synchrony, what can happen is the bird kind of gets confused, or it starts getting frustrated because it's doing what you ask it, and then it's not getting the reward, which can lead to the bird either unlearning the behavior or no longer responding during training sessions, staying unfocused, flying away, saying, I want nothing to do with this anymore. These little things can happen. So the main thing that I would say is to go for a trick or a behavior that the bird knows already, like really, really concrete. If you want to do a few in sync, I would do no more than 2 to 3 clicks at once for things it knows. So for example, if I wanted to make Elfie work a little bit, I would say Elfie spin, click, Elfie whistle, click, and then the last one, Elfie wave, click, and maybe use a nice reward for him doing all those 3 in synchrony. But the other thing that's important too is making sure that during this etiquette, if you click, in between you clicking, you should have that treat ready so that that bird is ready to take it and you can instantly reinforce the behavior it wants. Right? So if you have a clicker, you click for a reward that it does, and then you're shuffling, trying to grab it. And then in between that, he like does something else, whether that's like whistle or anything else. And then you give it the reward. It can be confusing to the bird to an extent where he thinks that the reason he's getting that reward is for the trick he did in between while you were going to go and grab that snack to give to him, right? So that's just an example. So just making sure that you are not doing more than 2 to 3 repetitions at a time for specific behaviors on the click side of things, and making sure that as soon as you click, you have that reward ready to reinforce that behavior that you want. Now, mistake number 5. It's not really a mistake, but I would say it's more along the lines of patience or incremental improvement. And what do I mean by that, right? So we ultimately want to work with our bird's kind of natural ability and the pace that it sets for us. We never want to approach training our parrots as I demand you do this for me, or I'm asking this of you, but more so of, are you willing to work with me for these desires that we want? And I'll give you a great example of that. And for example, when you see harness training, which can be very, very tricky, right? Because with harness training, parrots don't like stuff on them, period. And especially if you have an adult bird that's 8, 10 years old, it's known a certain way of living for so long, and then you introduce this harness and it's not desensitized to it, period, and you just try to throw it on your bird right away, it's probably going to panic, it's going to freak out, and then you are now decreasing the probability that you'll ever be able to even harness train it, because now it's associating the harness as positive punishment, or you as positive punishment by default because you're the one holding the harness, right? And incremental improvement, and really what patience mean, is taking a step back. So if your bird is uncomfortable with just the presence of that harness, for example, we start simple. We use that target and clicker stick to desensitize it, to eventually get him to touch it. Hey, good things happen when you touch it. And then the next phase of that is, let's just open up this harness with a big loop and have your bird walk closer and closer to it and put its head through, this like big giant loop where it's not really on the bird, but just poking his head through, and have that confidence to come through. Puts his head through, click reward, it starts building trust. Okay, this thing's not going to do anything to me. Then we make that loop smaller and smaller, and then we naturally put it on it, and then we eventually put the head loop through, and then we work the wing, and we do this progressively, right? That's incremental improvement. So just having the patience to know that you're not going to get the desired result that you want right away. It took me probably like 3 to 4 months to get Alfie like even in a harness, because I was working toward that incremental improvement, where I read his body language and he wasn't comfortable with certain phases of it, right? Another example of that is like maybe teaching your parrot to step up, but your parrot's very, very afraid of hands. Well, instead of just going straight for that step up, we have incremental improvement, and we have a little bit of patience where we start targeting that bird to just come onto the hand, put a foot on it, or get closer and closer to it, put a foot on it, click reward, then 2 feet, and then we naturally progress to it coming on because it's desensitized to the hand in general, and only good things happen when it's around the hand. So these are just some of the 5 common parrot training mistakes that I see. If you're making them, hey, it's no problem. We all kind of go through them at one point or another. But that's what we're here for on this channel, is to make you a better parrot owner and to develop a long-lasting relationship with your feathered friend. This is Alfie and I, who's technically preening now, signing out for today. Thank you guys for watching, and if you haven't already, make sure to comment, like, and subscribe.